two are ill and attending remotely, but they can vote. And Hadia's not attending, which is why I'm sitting here in the middle. All right.
All right.
Okay. We have one member of the committee, Chair Mohammed will not be joining us this evening. We have two members of the committee joining virtually. I sent both of them an email with instructions for what to say. So would both of you mind, one after the other, unmuting yourself and reading your little script?
Good evening, it's Katie. I am at home, sick today, but I'm attending our meeting via Zoom under the 2449, AB 2449, just cause provision for contagious illness.
Thank you.
Hi, it's Mira. Same thing here. So I'm also attending this meeting on Zoom under the AB 2449 just cause provision due to contagious illness.
Okay. In the absence of our chair, our vice chair, Melgen, will be chairing tonight's meeting. So you can call it to order whenever you're ready.
7 o'clock, call to order now.
Great.
Roll call, Lizzie?
Yes. Committee Member Fassoon?
Here.
Committee Member Hodges?
Here.
Committee Member Lieberman?
Here.
Vice Chair Melgen?
Here.
Committee Member Vahil McClanahan?
Here.
Committee Member Larson?
Here.
Great. Okay.
And next is,
We have our land
our,
acknowledgement.
statement.
Yes.
The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lisjan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together to build a better future for all that now make this their home. Next is the approval of the minutes. I have a comment, but maybe I'll let you all go first if you have any, for the approval of the minutes from the June 21st meeting. Hearing?
No comments.
So far, okay. On my presentation, what's here, this is 6.6-3, the presentation on electric heat pumps.
Mm-hmm.
What's there is accurate, but maybe the more relevant piece would be to delete part of the last sentence and say that the CPUC must adopt new electricity rates, comma, including income-based fixed charges, comma, by July 2024. That's also in the presentation. What I think I said at the time was that they may issue a proposed decision later this year. That's probably their schedule. But the law that caused this action to occur says that something has to be in place by July 1, 2024. And I think that's more relevant. So maybe change it to read that way. That's all I have.
So typically what we do, if there's an amendment to the minutes, you can either choose as a committee to have staff make the edit and then bring the minutes back to the next meeting to be voted on, or you can vote to approve the minutes with that change, and then we wouldn't bring it back. We would just change it verbatim with what the committee agrees upon. But it's up to you all how you want to handle it.
I'm happy with approving it and letting you make the change. Is that okay with everybody else here?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
great. I will now do well, first, do we have a motion to approve and a second?
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes.
I'll second that.
Okay. Great. Committee Member Fasoon? Sorry, I think we missed that.
Yes.
Great, thank you. Committee Member Hodges?
Yes.
Committee Member Larson?
Yes.
Committee Member Lieberman?
Yes.
Vice Chair Melgen?
Yes.
Committee Member Vahil McClanahan? Okay, I'm noticing just for the folks on Zoom, I think you have to wait like half a second after clicking unmute to say yes. We're just catching the S.
Thank you.
Okay, cool. Thank you both. Okay, motion carries. We'll make the edit to the minutes and then post them online.
Okay. Next is public comment. Any members of the public wish to make a comment?
If any members of the public would like to make a comment on an item not on the agenda during this general public comment period, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature on Zoom. And we do not have any members attending in person. I am seeing no hands raised. So back to you, Vice Chair Melgen.
Okay. Next, we have announcements, and start with the staff and committee members. We'll start with the staff.
I just have one announcement this month. Maybe I'll give another announcement. The compost hub is actively ongoing at the Giltrap Community Farm. We've delivered another load of compost.
That's right. We have now delivered 50 cubic yards of compost in total.
So make sure if you would like to use some compost on your garden during this gardening season to stop by the hub at the Giltrap Farm on San Pablo Avenue on Sundays between
12 and 4.
12 and 4. The only other announcement I have is that there is no meeting next month in August due to the city advisory body recess. Council isn't going to meet in August, and therefore there's nothing to advise on, so no committee meetings in August. So enjoy your summer vacation. That's it for staff announcements.
Any announcement by committee members? And any from our fellow friends on Zoom?
A question about the compost.
Uh-huh.
Is there like a flyer or some sort of announcement that we can share around on social media or post up at the library about that?
Yes, I do have a flyer that we've sent around and posted a few places, but I'm happy to send that for you to share. And I can also do more posting. We do kind of social media in various tranches, and we'll continue to do that. But I'm happy to send it to the members if you'd like to share it in your own social media.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. It's a great resource.
Great. We can open it up to public comment on the announcements. If any members of the public would like to speak to the announcements, please raise your hand. Quiet audience this evening, no hands raised. Back to you.
Okay, next is item 5 on the agenda, and 5-1, an update on Measure DD. So that's Michelle.
It is. One moment. Okay. Everyone, can the members on Zoom see this well? Okay, wonderful. Okay, so this evening I'm going to be giving a short update on Measure DD allocations by council. And I'll just start off with some background on Measure DD itself. We're toggling between extremes here. So Measure DD is something that we bring up now and then, but it's good to redefine for new members and members of the public who might not know about it. This is a utility users tax. So a tax on those who use our utilities in the city, gas, electricity, and water. And it's a tax that's levied based on how much of each of those utilities you're using. And this was passed by the voters in the 2020 election a few years ago. And the basics of what this specific measure did are down at the bottom of the slide. So it changed the tax amount for electricity and natural gas from 7.5% to 9%. And then it created a new tax on water at 7.5%. So that's kind of the basics of what Measure DD is. Obviously, it's generating new revenue for the city. There's also some slightly tricky things about how this tax works. So the revenue that's created by this tax is added to the general fund. That's kind of like our main city account, essentially. It's not a special fund. So, you know, when we talk about Measure DD funds, sometimes we often make it sound as if that's sort of its own special pot of money, when in fact it's not. It just goes into the general fund. However, the measure on the ballot did include language stating specifically that the council will endeavor to expend at least 1/3 of that new revenue to fund action items that are in the climate action adaptation plan, so on climate action related programming. So there is this sort of connection to using that new revenue for climate action projects, but it's not in a special fund in the city's accounting. So hopefully that makes sense, but I'm happy to answer questions about it. And also just for context, this is generating an estimated $750,000 per year, roughly in that range.
Michelle? The 750,000 is the total DD.
That's that 1/3.
Not the 1/3. Or is it the 1/3 part?
The 750,000 was the 1/3, I think.
I'm actually not positive. We should check.
Sorry, I'll double check on that at the end of this. A good question. I'm pretty sure it's 1/3, but I'll check. But in any case, so in terms of the allocation of this revenue, the city council has allocated it to a few different programs. And again, because it's general fund money, it's a little bit tricky, but basically the way that this has happened is that the city council, in the process of creating these programs that I'm about to describe, has basically said that they're designating this as part of this Measure DD expenditure to meet that goal of spending 1/3 of the revenue on climate action items. So it's really just designated by the council to get into this chart. So the projects that have been allocated funds so far are first the street tree planting fee waiver. So this is simply a waiver of our previous fee that was levied on people who wanted to get a street tree in front of their house. That's now free for everyone. And there's an expense budget of $30,000, basically covering the fees that would have been paid. So it's essentially like the city paying its own fees. The second one is the EV charging pilot program. This is the multifamily electric vehicle charging pilot program that I've spoken about in this committee a few times before. Both of those were passed on October 18th of 2021. And the EV charging pilot had a budget of $50,000. And then the third is the heat pump HVAC rebate program, originally passed March 7th of 2022 with a budget of $40,000. And then in February of this year, when that original funding ran out, the city council added another $65,000. So the total for all of these together is $185,000. And that's the total that's been expended over the course of this entire time since October of 2021. And that is the end of my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions, and I'll, maybe Lizzie's found an answer right now, but hopefully we can find an answer to Member Larson's question soon. But I'm happy to take other questions in the meantime.
I have some other just sort of accounting questions, just so I make sure I understand. So if it's $750 a year and then 185 has been allocated, that leaves 565,000 unspent?
So, sort of. The 185 is in total, and the programs here are not annual expenses. They're one-time expenses.
Okay.
Maybe with the street tree fee waiver is a little bit of a funny one, but so effectively you could think of the budget as being all the revenue we've generated since
Yeah.
it passed, which would be like 2.5 years worth. And this $185,000 it's all one-time expenses. It's not repeating multiple years.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense. So, but I'm assuming there's no discrete bucket for the funds, as you said, so this money is not rolling over then, right? You're not like like you're saying, each year it's 750, but what's not spent on cap measures just sort of goes away at the end of the fiscal year. Am I following that right, or?
It's kind of like if you think about your own bank account, and if you're like, this year I'm gonna spend 10K on a trip. If you don't spend that 10K, it's still just in your general bank account. You could use it for next year, you could not. It's all part of one pot. Since there's no actual tag to each funding, it doesn't necessarily roll over, but it doesn't not roll over either, if that makes sense. It's all one pot.
Right, yeah, it really does come down to really the way council interprets their own goal of spending a third of the revenue. They could choose to interpret that as, we'll try to do that on an annual basis, and if we don't do it, then we forget about it and start fresh new year. Or they could think about it as this overall pot of money, and they could spend part of that. They could spend less one year and then spend that excess in another year to roll over, as you were saying. But yeah, like Lizzie said, there aren't specific rules on it. So it really depends on the way council approaches the funding.
I mean, I feel like, yeah, you guys go ahead. I have some thoughts, but I don't know. I mean, it just seems like there's an opportunity there. There are a lot of topics we've discussed over the last few months that seemed expensive, or that there wasn't necessarily funding for, things like, electrifying municipal fleet or having EV chargers, things that are pretty expensive. But if we're leaving $500,000 on the table each year, when these funds are supposed to be used for cap projects, I'm sure there are some opportunities to leverage the dollars. I know that would take some analysis to figure out, what are the best uses, but it looks like an opportunity to me.
So we did find some clarification. The $750,000 per year is the 1/3 of the revenue, and the total revenue is.
Okay.
Since can anyone do quick?
3 times that.
Yeah, it's three times that. Yes.
Yeah.
It's just under $2 million. Any other questions?
I mean, I just would like to second that. Like, wow, that's a great opportunity to fund a lot of the things that I've heard about just in our first few meetings. To float an idea, something that might be helpful is to, maybe quarterly or something, get the same report so that we can make recommendations in order to keep up with essentially the spending goal that council has.
We can chat about that. Also, I want to make sure we're not jumping too much into discussion, just questions,
Sorry,
and then we'll
thank
do,
you.
no worries, public comment, and then we'll go back to general discussion.
Okay.
Can that money be used for personnel? Is it only for programs, or can it be used for personnel, staff, contractors, that sort of thing?
It's totally up to council
Yeah.
and how they decide to allocate it.
Okay.
I guess, yeah, has this, or I guess, yeah, how closely does council track this? Like, do you all kind of talk about this with them?
They just got a budget update on June 5th, where they received a 259-page document that had all the revenues and expenditures over the last 2 fiscal years, and then looking forward to the next cycle. So they know the numbers.
I'll also note that the chart I showed you a moment ago, I actually pulled from a council staff report. I think the most recent one was for the secondary funding for the heat pump rebate program, just kind of reminding them what had been spent so far and kind of how we were tagging this. So as these things come up, we're kind of bringing this into focus as well.
And they typically request, as Michelle said, when there's a program developed by CAC or by council, and they want to allocate DD funds to that program, there's typically an update of, this is how much has been spent thus far.
I was just curious if our current staff positions and things like carbon-free Albany, are those, is this the allocations that city council is considering as DD allocations, or are they taking other, are those just the special projects we've done and they're actually allocating other things to the DD funds as climate adaptation?
So the way we've been kind of managing this odd general fund special revenue situation is that we've only been tracking the expenditures that the council specifically has said they want to allocate as Measure DD funding. So those are the only things, those special programs I've shown you. And generally, the way they've seemed to approach it so far is that they're looking at this as sort of a fund for special action projects rather than staff time. But yeah, again, like Lizzie said, that's up to them in the way that they choose to define it.
Good. I just didn't want to get all excited, then have them come back and say, wait, no. Anyway, great.
Is there any possibility that Measure DD funds could be used to fund the climate education program that committee members Fasoon and Mohammed have been working on? Is that in the cap?
That is not in the cap. I think that's above me and Michelle being able to speak to, because that is to be an AUSD program, which is its own jurisdiction with its own budget. So I don't know, likely no. They're city revenues, whereas AUSD has their own revenues.
Is there a line item in the fiscal year budget for these funds? I'm not quite sure I understand the accounting of it.
Yeah, I can send you the budget packet. I'm not sure Michelle and I know the full extent of the accounting either. They track, I can send you the budget report, but it was a part of
Okay.
the June 5th council packet, page 122 of the entire packet, 107 of the budget attachment shows revenues. And there is a line item for the utility users tax revenue, but that is not broken up into the 1/3, 2/3. It's just utility user tax revenue for fiscal year '22.
Okay. But there's like the revenue side, and then there's the like, what it's being planned, what it will be spent on. I mean, not specifically, but do you know what I'm saying? It's like they're the two sides of the ledger. And so I guess what I'm sort of poking at is what happened with the past year's funds. I would understand, I work for a public agency too. I understand if it's just the opportunity dries up when I don't spend my budget at the end of the year, it just goes away and resets, right? And so I'm wondering if it resets at the turn of the fiscal year, which I would understand, but that means that like whatever the unspent funds went away, which I would completely understand. I just want to know if that's the case. I feel like we should be able to determine that or not to see the size of the opportunity.
Yeah, so the revenues, like I said, they go into this general fund bucket, and the general fund gets, allocated into all these different places, and some of those things are like you get this much budget for this year and it dries up and it renews. But these Measure D programs are not really formally in the budget as like Measure D climate allocations or anything like that. They're sort of programs that are within whatever department, such as community development. They're part of that larger budget. It's really just sort of the way that the council is choosing to define it for themselves, and they're sort of tracking it more in a policy sense than in a accounting sense. And so all of those unused funds are just sitting in the general fund, in the savings account, like Lizzie said. And so it's not like it goes away anywhere. It's just in the general fund waiting to be spent on any number of things as council decides.
We can get more clarification on the accounting though, but I'm not sure that we need to worry too much about the level of detail of the accounting. Basically, what we wanted to provide an update today for was there's a utility users tax. It's raising money every year. Council has said they'll spend 1/3, endeavor to spend 1/3 of it on climate action. So if this committee is to come up with a project or a proposal, we could go to council, propose the project, and then propose they use Measure DD. I think that's the level of detail that we need for moving forward. Other questions?
Yes, staff, do you have a qualitative sense of whether, because I feel like council has been, supportive of a lot of different climate initiatives. Do you have a sense that they are feeling some urgency to get these funds spent? Or is it just sort of like it's one of many, many things that they're thinking about and it'll happen when it happens?
It's definitely a council priority. They recently did their council strategic planning, which you're able to find online if you look up the council strategic plan. And one of the, forgive me if I'm mislabeling the terms, but one of their umbrella objectives is to do climate action and adaptation work. So it's definitely a priority for them. And obviously, they're very aware of the Measure DD funds that are available to do that. So I think it is very much on their radar. And they've, in the last year, considered Measure DD multiple times in the different proposals that have come forward.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Other questions?
Any questions from the public? Is that the time?
We do have a hand raised. We'll now open it up to public comment. If there are any members of the public who would like to speak to this item, please raise your hand. We do have one member. Lucinda Young.
Yes, thank you. I was one of the Albany residents that campaigned very hard for Measure DD I will say I spoke with probably at least 100 or more Albany residents about Measure DDD. And the public voted for this measure because of and we understood it wasn't a guarantee, but the representation that 1/3 would be spent on climate action. It was a reflection of the deep concern in this community about the climate crisis. And we've all seen the news the last few weeks. Various places on the planet have hit the highest heat ever on record. We've got unprecedented wildfires raging through Canada with the effect of this wildfire smoke felt thousands of miles away. We are in a climate emergency. And this is why this measure passed. And it does really deeply concern me to find out that with all that needs to be done, that so much of these funds have not been spent yet. There is such a need, and that has been talked about, month after month in these meetings about the need for climate action. And often the limitation is funding. We've talked about EV chargers. We've talked about the need for additional personnel to prepare the various proposals that are needed for Inflation Reduction Act grants that are coming down. I mean, there's a huge opportunity here, and it concerns me that more of these funds have not been used. And I know there has been discussion about trying to get another measure before the public. And I think it's going to be really hard to do that there needs to be some public accountability to how these funds are used. And I realize that under the measure, the 1/3 was not guaranteed, but the voters trusted our city council that they would aim to use 1/3. And I think this committee has a responsibility to really come up with some some uses for these funds and not just let them stay in the general fund. Thank you.
If there are any other members of the public who would like to speak to this item, please raise your hand. No other hands raised. So back to the committee.
This is discussion among us. Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to say I really appreciate the transparency. This is the first time we've seen actual numbers around DD, so that's really great to see. So thank you very much for bringing that forward. And it must have been, it's a little it's difficult topic because, like Lucinda said, we should be spending this, and part of this committee's job is to propose things that the city council is going to be, debating on and potentially acting on. And we're super happy that two of the programs here actually originated from this committee, and you guys pushed it through and got to city council, so that's really awesome. So I just wanted to say appreciate the transparency and bringing it forward. So it's really good to see that, and I think it'll re-up in my mind, hopefully the committee's mind, that it's not an obstacle. It's not, we don't have to be on a shoestring. We've got opportunity. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no problem for the transparency. It is all transparent because it's public funds. So we never want to hide this.
Right. No,
yeah.
I mean that at all, but I just,
right.
You're bringing it forward and
yeah.
sort of saying, here it is. So
right.
It's great. Appreciate that.
Any other committee member wish to speak? Dan?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just sort of thinking through what next steps would be knowing this information now. It's like, I feel like there are a lot of, we've identified a lot of good ways that we could use the funds. I don't know if we should have a subcommittee try and come up with a proposal for how the funds should be used, or if that should be staged over time, or, I'm just throwing ideas out, but I feel like we're learning about this new great opportunity, and I want to make sure that that seems like a critical role for our committee, is to make some recommendations to the city council about what might be the top uses for it.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I want to highlight, as committee member Larson said, a lot of the DD expenditures have been made are programs that originated at the CAC. And the best process for getting a proposal to the council, which is what has happened in the past, I'll use the example of the multifamily EV charger pilot program. A subcommittee of the CAC formed, not necessarily with the intent to spend Measure DD, but with the intent to develop a program, develop the program without the funds in mind, not focusing on that as the piece, but developed a program, solidified it, presented it to council, and then the suggestion to council under financial considerations was fund it with Measure DD. And so I think committees and commissions don't oversee funds, they oversee projects and proposals. So I would say if you have a project or a proposal in mind, if we develop it and it goes to council, that's when we can say, this could potentially be funded by Measure DD, and that's their decision. But I would caution against just coming up with making a subcommittee with the intent to just spend money. I think it's much better to approach it with, within the subcommittees we have, or forming a new one out of a discussion we have, coming up with a project idea that's implementable, and then develop a project, and then let council worry about the funding, knowing that they could use Measure DD. But the multifamily EV charge at pilot program, that's, I think, a golden example. And also the heat pump rebate program, that's another great example of an idea that came up and the CAC developed and then proposed to council, and then council funded it with Measure DD.
I'll just piggyback on that, because that's what I was just thinking, that, and then there's, this committee is such that there's new people coming in, which is fantastic, but then you lose a little bit of like, how did we do that? And so, thank you for saying that, because that was, the subcommittees we have, like the transportation, zero energy transportation, we've got a backlog of ideas, and we started meeting about, like, what do we want to prioritize, and so that's the way to do it. We take our top thing, formulate it to the point where we can bring it to this committee. Committee agrees, yes, we want to push this over to city council. We can do some budgeting, and then you get it as a proposal. At least that was the way that we've done it.
Yeah, I think that the most productive subcommittees we've had are the ones that have one specific scope for a very specific project, like the multifamily EV charging pilot program. So that's something I encourage you, if you're in a subcommittee, maybe work with your subcommittee to have one project. And if it seems feasible, develop it, and that's when we can move forward with the proposal. So yeah, Committee Member Larson, you can be the spokesperson for how a effective subcommittee gets a project forward.
I'd like to thank you. I had kind of had the vibe until just now that we were basically operating on a shoestring, and that seems not to be the case. So that's wonderful news. Thank you.
Is city council taking input from, like, consultants, or are they open to consultants? I'm just thinking about all the different climate initiatives that are going on right now. There must be consultants out there that do this for a living, that, here's the programs that have worked in, Aspen, Colorado, and here's the blueprint. Are they open to that?
We work with consultants a lot. I think I'm currently working with 4 different consulting firms on different projects. It's project specific. We don't necessarily bring on a consultant to dream up projects. It's more like we have the project of, like, one of our concrete examples is doing technical assistance to restaurants to get them to divert food waste. It's specific projects. Yeah.
if there's no more on that, we could move to item 5-2 on the agenda. Does that seem about the right time? Any more? Do you have any more on 5-1?
I just wanted to thank Michelle for bringing that, and second what's been said about, I had no idea we had unspent funds, and I agree that that is a great problem to have, because the urgency that we feel around climate is coupled to an urgent pool of funds to spend. So I'm excited to work with all of you to put forth more proposals, and I would be interested to hear from staff just on an ongoing basis if there are things in the cap that they feel, maybe some more concrete work is needed, maybe some more proposals are needed to fulfill these goals as written. I think that would be helpful for us to know in drafting future proposals.
Committee member Fasoon, are you just about ready to say something? Anyway.
I'm kind of just listening because I'm kind of sick and it hurts to talk.
Oh, I'm sorry. Right.
Then I think we're,
Guess we'll go to 5-2.
okay.
I can share my screen for this one as well. So I'm just going to give a quick overview here rather than a full presentation. So as you might remember, at our meeting last month, Lizzie and I described this commercial EV charging guide as an upcoming project. And we told you that we would bring an outline this month, which is what we're doing. So this is a proposal to create a guide for owners of commercial parking lots in the city to help them install EV charging on their own, rather than the city doing like a direct install kind of program. It's really just guidance for them to help them make use of the opportunities that exist. So what we have for you this month is an outline, just kind of going over the types of information that we want to put into this guide. And then we'll open it up to you for questions, of course, first, and then for your comments and thoughts and suggestions into how to fill this out into the final product. So hopefully you've all had a chance to look at it. I won't go over everything in here. But the kind of big points are talking about the benefits and, obviously that kind of selling it. Why would they actually want to do this? The basics of how EV charging works. And this includes some of the slightly more in the weeds stuff about like level 2 versus level 1 versus fast charging, how payment works, which is obviously a hot topic for owners of commercial lots, and all the different ways that can function in practice. And then onto the sort of more opportunity side of it, things like incentives, such as tax credits, rebate programs, low carbon fuel standard. We'll be looking far and wide to try to make sure we gather up everything that exists and explain it so that it's really, understandable for people that are not experts in this at all. And then also talking about the sort of business side of things as well. There are lots of EV charging companies out there, software companies, all these kinds of things. And so we're planning to have a section that talks about the different models, the different business models there. Things like, you could have a subscription service where you might not actually own the charging equipment, but you kind of subscribe to have it in your lot and you make some of the revenue from that, or leasing it. There's like advertising options like the ones we have in the Sprouts parking lot. So those different kinds of business models that exist that can also make it pencil out for business owners. And then also just kind of talking about these larger community-wide benefits, why we're pushing people to do this beyond just the sort of business side as well. So that's kind of the overview here, and there's some more details in the bullet points. But we just wanted to, like I said, bring this all to you in its sort of early stages so we can gather all of that input before we make a final product. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Let's see, I had one question. Yeah, I know we've got a couple commercial properties in Albany, like Sprouts and the parking lot behind, I guess, Bob's Burger. I was just curious, yeah, have you had a chance to talk to any of them and see kind of what were the key barriers or what did push them over the edge to go for it?
We haven't done any outreach as of yet. I think our idea is to kind of put this together and then start doing the outreach and have more of a conversation. We've chatted a little bit with our economic development staff member who has more of those relationships with the business owner, so we can try to kind of all work together. But as far as I know, we haven't actually chatted with anyone who owns a commercial lot as of yet.
I think as a part of this, we could reach out to those who have installed it and ask, what was it that convinced you? We haven't done that yet, but I think that's a good idea.
Yeah. Okay, great.
I do think the chargers in Sprouts, I think you mentioned this, are the chargers that I believe are free because of the advertising model. So that is something we put on this guide as an opportunity, because hopefully that would push those who don't want to spend any money onto the side of, well, if I'm making money, then this makes sense. We can talk about this in the discussion, but perhaps this is an opportunity to use some of the city funds as an incentive program. So finding ways to get people to make this decision on their own. And we created this as a response to getting feedback that, as we discussed last month, because there's a lot of barriers for the city to overcome in terms of putting in city-owned chargers. How can we empower businesses to put in their own chargers and manage their own chargers, or contract with contractors? Rather than the city managing 50 chargers, maybe we have 50 businesses managing 50 chargers. So this is what this was in response to.
I really like that idea. It's like, we were just presented with the last item with an opportunity for the spending, and already it's like, oh, we could use some of that money to create an incentive for public charging on private land. I like it.
I had
Will
a
there be
few-
info in the brochure about how to, like, if I'm a business owner, I might be curious, like, where do I start? Am I installing a charger with will there be a list of contractors or firms that can set them up for you, that sort of thing?
We don't have that really listed in here right now, but I think that's a helpful idea. There will be like the businesses that own the charging infrastructure, and sometimes those are sort of like all-in-one businesses that have their own contractors, but we could look into independent contractors and other businesses that sort of do some of the process of like shepherding these projects through.
Mm-hmm.
Any more questions? Okay. I had a couple. One of the bullets under technical capabilities said electrical load sharing, and what does that mean?
Yeah, great question. So basically some chargers, actually many chargers now, have the technical capability to route the electrical power to certain chargers that are being used, or divide it between multiple chargers. So basically, you'll have maybe 10 chargers that are all connected to the same fuse, and if one person is using one of the 10 chargers, that charger gets all the power, but then if 5 people come and hook in, then they'll split the power between those 5 or between the 10. So it allows kind of a dynamic amount of power without completely overloading your electrical system.
Okay, thank you. And for low carbon fuel standard credits, at some point I'd be interested just to see the numbers. How many LCFS credits do you get per kilowatt hour put into an EV, and what's the current market price of an LCFS credit? I assume those are public information somewhere.
Yeah, I feel like the last time I looked at it, a credit was like $250 or something, but I can't remember how many credits you could get from a single charger in a year. Definitely one of the things we're going to look into more before we finish it. Those credits are a little bit complicated the way the system works, so I don't know a lot about it off the top of my head right now.
That's all the questions I had. Any more questions from committee members? No. Any from committee member Fasoon? Committee member Katie?
Okay.
And public questions, is that next?
Public comment? Yes. If any members of the public would like to speak to this item, please raise your hand. Lucinda Young.
Yes, thank you. I am very happy to hear about this proposal or suggestion to work with business owners to encourage, incentivize EV chargers. I think that's great, and I hope that the committee will pursue that. I missed the first half of last month's meeting, unfortunately, but I do understand that there was a discussion of the city's EV chargers installation and some discussion about the city council's including installation in their plan from a couple of years ago that never happened. And I understand that there was some discussion about various barriers to the city installing EV chargers. I don't know if a decision was made to abandon the city's installation of EV chargers, and this proposal today is being presented as an alternative to that, or if this is in addition. I would urge the committee to, if a decision was made to not pursue the city installing EV chargers, I would ask the committee to reconsider that, especially since tonight we found out there is a lot more DD funds available for climate action. I think one of the barriers was financial to the city EV charging. Thank you.
If any other members of the public would like to speak to this item, please raise your hand. Seeing none, back to you, Vice Chair Melgen, for
Now
discussion.
It's time for discussion by the committee members. Maybe we'll start with the folks on Zoom. And maybe it's unfair of me to point the finger at you, so I apologize if that's not right, especially since one of you can't talk very well right now. I'm sorry about the sore throat. Anybody here?
Just a couple thoughts on the brochure. Looks really good, well thought out. You might consider some sort of ROI for the commercial, just as an example of what they could expect. I mean, they're going to be very practical, dollars and cents oriented probably. So maybe, if you rough ROI on it. Any success stories of other places that have, you were talking about, understanding why other people have invested in charging stations like Sprouts. Maybe just a couple examples like that would be good. And then I would think understanding their commercial concerns. Like I only bring that up because the last bullet point allows renters and those living in multifamily properties the option to charge, which sounds like a really nice thing. And of course we would want that, but then I put in my commercial property hat. I'm like, do I really want people camping out and charging on there? So I'm not saying that would be a concern. I'm just saying, understand what their perspective is and what their concerns might be. That sounds like a really good outreach.
Yeah, I would just add to what you were saying. I wonder if either of the proprietors who have EV charging, like the Sprouts or Boss Burger or whatever the other one is, would be willing to make their contact information available, maybe not on a brochure, but like to you. Because I think if I owned a commercial lot here, I'd want to talk to those folks and, you know, not just find out why, sort of what was the tipping point, but like, how did you do it? How, you know, and I think they probably took very different routes just based on what you see there, right? There's like 2 Volta chargers that's paid for by advertising, and the other one looks sort of like an earlier adoption of level 2 charging with a different vendor. And then maybe even find, I don't know, maybe a, what do they, charge point down under the, are those city-owned? No? Do you know who owns those? Charge points that
Under
are
the
like-
overpass?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think those are owned by MTC
Oh, okay.
for the park and go.
Yeah, yeah.
I
yeah,
believe
it's
they're owned by MTC.
Okay, all right, so it's not a private, yeah. Anyway.
Quote me, though.
Yeah, no, it's all right. I was just thinking maybe even just like giving that, you know, offering to have some kind of handoff. I'm sort of trying to put myself in the shoes of a business owner. I think I'd want to talk to someone who had done it.
Right.
So,
Another business owner who it penciled out for, and
yeah.
great idea. Quickly jump in and say, it sounds like there are a lot of great ideas from the committee. If anyone wanted to form a subcommittee or do additional analysis on this, we would more than welcome that if you would like to be engaged behind the scenes.
I have a question sort of pursuant to the public comment from Lucinda, encouraging us to, you know, take a second look at a city-run chargers. I was personally pretty excited to walk away from that being a city-funded project because there are so many private vendors who like to install chargers. So I'm curious if we have market research, I guess, information from people who live in Albany about their decisions. In other words, are we aware of there being many people in Albany who would definitely get an EV if only there were chargers? And so we're trying to meet that need as a city? Or is it just sort of like one other thing we could do and we don't really know if that would drive adoption at all?
I don't know of any specific data on that question of why people are choosing for or against EVs. I don't think we've done any sort of survey on that. What I can say is that kind of like in a general sense with these larger scale surveys and you know, qualitative data and stuff, the ability to charge is definitely a major concern. There are a lot of people that have range anxiety, it's called, you know, being worried that they won't be able to charge often enough or that they'll run out of charge. So I know that is a concern, and there's sort of like a build it and they will come type approach that's pretty common when people talk about this. But, you know, there's, like you said, there are lots of reasons people choose whether or not to get an EV. So I think it's one of the things in the mix, and I don't know that we have any sort of very, very clear indication of how much it weighs among certain populations.
It's something we can look into. We've hosted, as a city, I think in the last 4 years, I can think of 3 EV 101 presentations we've co-hosted with the city of Berkeley. And I can see if there are any of those coming up, or if we can organize one, and maybe we can use that as an opportunity to get some data on, are people not adopting EVs because they can't charge at a public station, or are they not getting EVs because they're expensive, or because they're worried that it doesn't fit their lifestyle? We can brainstorm a bit.
Also, thank you, Michelle and Lizzie, that's really helpful. I guess I also wonder, and you know, I'm a latecomer, right? I've only been to 2 meetings, but we seem to spend a lot of airtime on EVs and less on other sustainable transportation options. Now there's a whole transportation commission, so I'm curious as to why EVs in particular have sort of risen to the top of our attention as opposed to things like transit or active transportation.
I can try to answer that a little. I mean, I think it's a complex question, and they're all kind of in the mix to some extent. I think maybe part of the reason that EVs are a little bit more commonly discussed in this committee is that public transit is something that we as a city don't have very much control over, unfortunately. So there's not all that much we can necessarily do to like make the 18 bus run more often or something. And then when it comes to active transit, a lot of the work there has to do with like crosswalk design and things that really do fall more under the purview of the Transportation Commission. And they do work on that very frequently. But, it gets into a lot of nuts and bolts transportation planning type work that does fall under the Transportation Commission. Not to say that there isn't work to be done in this committee necessarily, but I think a lot more of the kind of specific monthly work does happen over in transportation.
On the other two modes, I think if we're being honest, a large part of the EV conversation comes by request from the committee or by members of the public. So it's a committee. The committee can decide what they want to do when it comes to the transportation side of reducing emissions, so long as it doesn't cross into, as Michelle mentioned, specifically Transportation Commission jurisdiction.
Thank you. That's really helpful background. Thank you very much.
Can I elaborate from the Zero Energy Transportation Subcommittee standpoint? I promise not to be too long, but just because we don't get to talk directly very often, just to let you know, the subcommittee was initially called the EV Subcommittee, the electric vehicle, and we broadened our scope to zero energy transportation, specifically because of like your point, that it's not just EV vehicles, it's not just electric vehicles, but transportation is the biggest part of the pie of carbon emissions, and we know that transportation is a big factor, and getting people to change their behavior is a big part of that, and people have cars, and so EVs come up a lot because changing from a gas car to an electric car is a really simple transition that should be simple, and we're grappling with that. And then the last thing is we are working to have a collaboration with the Transportation Commission. We have a person from the Transportation Commission that's officially now a liaison for us, and so we can work with them on things like one of our things is seeing if we get a shuttle bus or van or something like that to go between the BART stations, to facilitate public transportation better. Those are the kind of things that we're thinking about in our purview. But like you said, we don't have control over the bus line or BART, so we're looking at a lot of different things there. So, anyway.
Thank you. That's also really helpful.
Any other discussion by committee members?
I'll bring it back to the table if anyone would like to, if there are any subcommittees existing or subcommittees that would like to form to do any analysis on this. We don't have a meeting in the month of August, and we have a few other things going on in the next few weeks that will be taking our focus, full transparency. If anyone wanted to take this on for a bit, and then maybe we could bring it back in September, but if not, it can stay on the staff side for now.
What sort of analysis are you thinking?
Any of the ideas that came up tonight, like ROI analysis, connecting with commercial accounts that have installed chargers to see if they're willing to do testimonials or provide insight into what worked and what didn't. Trying to ask some members of the public what their barrier to adopting an EV is. Is it charging or is it? Those kinds of things that came up. We could definitely do it on the staff side, but like I said, we have a few other things going on in the next few months that will probably take priority, so it's likely we couldn't bring anything back in September, but if a subcommittee wanted to pick it up and focus on it in the month of August, that would be fine too. It's up to the committee.
Does that fall within within the transportation subcommittee? It sounds like it might.
Those sound like some good items for us to take on.
Okay, great. Thank you. I can email you the notes I took.
Maybe it's time to move to item 5-3 and hope that committee member Fasoon can speak.
Should I just start talking?
Sure.
Okay. Yeah, so I know there was an email and a little like discussion around this, but it looks like, if I'm not mistaken, the next step is just to get approval to send this to AUSD. Is that correct?
Yes, the next move for the committee would be is if there are no further edits to be made, recommend that the Education and Outreach Subcommittee present this to AUSD.
So yeah, here it is. Hadia and I worked on this. I know she's not here today, but this is what we have so far. It's pretty similar to what we looked more in depth at last meeting. But yeah, if there's not anything major, then we would love it if we could get this approved and to move on to the next phase of the project finally.
Are we looking for a motion to support bringing of this to AUSD? Is that
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
I
that
think
would be
it's
the
like
proper
just approving
motion.
it.
I do think we should do the questions and then public comment, but then we can entertain a motion to have, how would the best wording be? Move to recommend that the subcommittee share proposal with AUSD. Something along those lines, I think would be best.
Suzie, I have a question.
Uh-huh.
So since this is more of an AUSD thing, would we still be able to say that, so we would be able to say it's supported by the CAC?
That's what
Or how
I've
does
been
that work?
told. I've been told that it would be okay to say the Climate Action Committee, an advisory body in the city of Albany, recommended this to AUSD.
Okay, thank you.
See, one question I did have is, I remember last time we had talked about potentially including some suggestions around including like climate solutions in the curriculum as well. I was curious if you all kind of discussed that, or if any, I guess I didn't see it added here, so I was curious if you still wanted to include that in the curriculum.
We did discuss that. I think she was supposed to edit it. Maybe that was not reflected on the document, but that can be added. Yeah, that was intended to be on the thing.
Gotcha. Okay, great. And I guess the other question I had, I know there were a couple of things kind of for fleshing out the details of the program I think are here around kind of figuring out some of the financial support and kind of how the relationship would work with kind of like teachers in the room. So I was curious, like when you I guess kind of like what level of detail do you need when you bring this to AUSD? Or like can that stuff kind of be figured out after this resolution is brought?
I assume that most of like the intricate details can be figured out after, and that's just reflection of what similar other districts did. Was they kind of had like not like a rough draft of an outline, but like the idea, and then once it was approved, then all the details started to kind of fall in place.
Gotcha. Okay, great.
Can you tell me more about who would develop the curricula and if you need funding to develop the curricula?
The curriculum would primarily be like made by students, either the subcommittee from this group working on that with other resources that are coming from other districts and the internet and similar of that sort. And then that would be confirmed with teachers. So it wouldn't be like teachers have to make the curriculum. It would be pre-made for them and they would just have to approve it. So it would not need extra funding for the curriculum itself.
Okay, I want to make sure that we're not creating, an unfunded mandate or whatever, that we're not saying you should do this, but we're not providing funding or support. And I know that your tenure is, like the student tenure on this committee is limited in like temporarily. So anything that you can, any comment that you can provide that'll give me more confidence around that you're not creating a program that it's incumbent on other folks to develop. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I know the chair is going to be the one who's going to kind of take this since I'm not a student in the district anymore. But since my position was still extended, I would still work on the subcommittee for that because I don't term off right in like a month. So I will still work with her on this, but she will take the lead. And then the whole point was we were gonna try to incorporate more EdStet students who are at the high school who come in every junior year for 2 years so that they would kind of continue the cycle. And then we would work from now until next year before she graduates to kind of get everything under control so other people could kind of step up and just keep it going and not have to put in the work in developing it. And we would do this in a manner that creates like very little opportunity for needing any sort of funding or extra work from the teachers, and it would kind of be more student-led.
Did you propose, I'm sorry, I did read this before the meeting, but I don't have it in front of me. Did you propose a timeline for implementing? Like, do you have a school year, like when you're saying this would be implemented in the 24-25 academic year, or like, are you that specific, or?
That's the goal, but it depends on AUSD's response. But that would be the goal.
Would be 24-25, so like a year,
So
not
like
this
next
year.
Yeah.
Not this coming year, but the year after? Not
Yes.
23-24, but in 24-25?
Oh no, this year, like we would start developing it for this starting in the fall to the next year, so to 2024.
23-24.
That's the goal. Yeah, that's
Okay.
the goal, but.
Yeah, my sense is that curriculum, like that teachers have their curriculum locked down a little bit more than, they might not have room, just, in their curriculum to add a component like this. I don't know, I just, I don't know if other people have a different perspective on that. I just want to be cautious that we're not being overly ambitious or, I just want to make sure we're being realistic.
I got that confused. I'm like, it would be approved over summer and then it would be the next following school year. Looking back at our notes, yeah. So it would be, because if they were to approve it, it would be over the summer, and then that means we would have the year after, because it takes, like, the approval process can be kind of tedious and take long after that.
The write-up, it looks as if it's being offered as an after-school rather than during school.
We're
program.
aiming it to be during school,
During school, okay.
yeah, but like a segment.
I have a question. Last time we talked about sort of a role of teachers here being that the teachers interface with the EdSet students as maybe mentors or I'm not quite sure what the term is, but the adult in charge of the EdSet experience. So will part of this program be sort of giving them a template for that?
And what do you mean? Like, can you explain that?
So like if I'm a third grade teacher and an EdSip student is going to come in and teach some climate literacy, I think I might be responsible then for being the adult with whom the EdSip student is interning. Is that how that program works?
It's usually you're interning for a place, not rather than an individual. Usually it's like, oh, I'm interning at Marin Elementary, or I'm interning at Albany Middle School. And you have a supervisor that kind of just signs off that you did it.
So is that
the
supervisor?
teacher would be more the supervisor
Okay.
than the person that they're interning for.
But the extent of their responsibility would just be to be like, yes, they came
Yeah,
and
those be
taught.
like verifying, oh yeah,
Okay.
student came, student didn't just, say they were coming and not show up.
Okay, thank you.
But yeah, we tried to make it as less of a burden on teachers as possible to kind of have it all just there ready, and then teachers would just have to kind of be there.
Are you anticipating any role for the CAC after the AUSD gets this letter? They come back to us for anything?
I think from what I understand is it's more just like it's becomes AUSD's project with us. But Lizzie, I could be mistaken. I know there was, some chat about like where the line is through AUSD and
Right.
a project. So maybe you can explain that better, but I think it just becomes AUSD after.
Yes.
Not sure.
Tonight, if the committee were to recommend that Committee Member Fasoon and Chair Mohammed propose this to AUSD, that would be the last of the CAC's engagement with it, because we're an advisory body to the City Council, not an advisory body to AUSD. And so this is more, I think, an opportunity for CAC to allow subcommittee members to take this and propose it, but then it's a student-led effort versus a CAC-led effort. And we can clarify that, Mira, but just to reiterate it, since we don't have any direct authority over AUSD, they're their own jurisdiction, it'd be like us telling Berkeley what they should do in their city. This is the last that it is CAC's project, and then it becomes a student-led project.
Yeah, and two things kind of before that. Yeah, I think so. In terms of timeline, since it does take like approval doesn't happen like tomorrow and they're like, okay, start. The timeline is kind of unknown in a way that just approval takes so long and all that processing. And before this we still have, teachers we're going to talk to at the school. But yeah, the main thing that we're asking is this cool? Is this all look good from the CAC standpoint? And can we say, oh, the CAC supports this when we present it? And then, yeah, kind of as Lizzie was talking about, then it would be students presenting it rather than this being a project directly from the CAC.
I think you said this earlier, but I still wasn't quite clear on what you just said. Makes it. Is this would we be if we decide as a committee, would we be able to propose this to AUSD as saying as supported by the Climate Action Committee?
Basically, yes.
Okay.
I think it would be that they could say the Climate Action Committee recommended that they propose it, so supported by.
Is it time for a public comment?
I believe so. If any members of the public would like to speak to this item, please raise your hand using the raise your hand feature on Zoom. I'm seeing no hands. So back to the committee for discussion.
I think my comfort level in terms of making a recommendation would be to propose, to propose that the subcommittee bring this proposal to AUSD. What I feel comfortable endorsing is like, yes, we should offer climate literacy, that you all should be the ones to sort of put forth, a plan. But I'm less comfortable sort of endorsing all the specifics because I have the sense, like you were saying, Nira, that the majority of those specifics are gonna be determined in collaboration with the AUSD.
Yeah, a lot of these aren't final, and it would be kind of inappropriate in a way for us to finalize those details and be like, okay, this is what you should do in your classroom. But yeah, that makes sense.
I feel I have some discomfort, and I don't know if this is just, if I should say all this stuff out loud, but I don't know about curriculum development. It's outside of my area of expertise. And the AUSD is is independent of us. I feel a little uncomfortable asking them to do something that I don't know anything. I don't have expertise in this, in what we're asking them to do. And if it was like a highly structured curriculum that you had in hand, that you were saying, we want to use this curriculum, it has a track record, and we recommend that you consider this over the next academic year for implementation the following academic year, or give them, I would feel more comfortable if it was a little more baked than it is now. And I'm trying to keep my mind open to that, but I think through this conversation, I'm still not there. So I'm just letting you all know. That's where I'm coming from.
Yeah, I've got, are you calling or should I just talk? Okay. It's funny because I had sort of the opposite sort of feeling when you said that, because I felt like I like the proposal as it is because it's sort of within our purview as a city entity to say, hey, here's a need. We see this need. We think this is important. And that is within our purview of climate is an important issue. And here's something that we think should be done. And AUSD, we would like you to look into this. And I think it would be out of our purview to bring a curriculum. I think that's sort of like, that's really AUSD's prerogative to figure out curriculum. I get your point that we're asking them to do work, that may not have been on their agenda, but I feel like it's like what you've put down is kind of what I would have expected in our purview. So that's just my perspective.
Okay. Yeah, I'd say kind of my opinions fall pretty aligned with Councilmember Vahil McClanahan, where, I sense this is a need and feel it's very important, but a little less comfortable kind of putting my kind of word behind the program as it is proposed. Just felt like there was a kind of a few things to work out. Or like, I guess, for instance, I'm seeing that it says it's an after-school program, but you mentioned it would be kind of during the school. So just some of those kind of consistencies of what we're actually proposing here. So yeah, I don't know if there's a way to, I guess, throw our weight behind the need, but with an understanding that some of these, I guess, not full behind the kind of program as it stands proposed right now.
I can maybe offer a thought. It sounds like this committee doesn't want to prescribe a curriculum to AUSD, which I think my staff perspective is that makes sense because they are a different jurisdiction. Like I keep mentioning, it would be like us telling the city of Berkeley what to do. What the committee could think about and would probably be a procedurally more correct pathway would just be to recommend that AUSD consider a climate literacy program, and then in conjunction with AUSD affiliated students acting on their own, not as in members of the subcommittee, they could work with AUSD to develop something without the CAC giving prescription on what it should be. So it could just be like a one sentence thing that says the CAC encourages climate literacy program rather than prescriptive measures, because it sounds like that's where some of the hesitation is, and I agree that we're not really supposed to be telling other agencies prescribe what to do. It's just not, it's not that linear. Just something to consider.
I share the concerns that Dan and Troy have mentioned. I wish this were a little bit more, I think you used the word baked, and I agree with that. It's fine in my mind to let students develop a draft curriculum, but I would want the teachers and maybe the school district or the school board to look at the curriculum before it was actually put into action. If the students who are working on this are the ones who are most active and potentially the most terrified by climate change, then the curriculum might be heavily weighted towards one point of view and maybe give short shrift to the notion of climate solutions. And so if there was a clear review and approval process based on what the students had put together, I'd feel better about this, but that doesn't seem to be in here right now.
I really appreciated Lizzie's wording, and I'm trying to recapture it to see what people's comfort level is with that. And I believe she said something like, we're offering a recommendation to AUSD in support of climate literacy programming or education for all Albany students. How does that sound?
I mean, I wonder if Member Fissoon is thinking about this as something that is for all students. My understanding it's supposed to be targeted for EdSet.
The EdSet students are teaching and the elementary students are learning. Is that correct?
So it would be for all elementary students. Is that what you're saying?
It would start ideally in elementary and then perhaps broaden out to like middle school, but elementary would be the pilot, start off area.
Not the most, well, anyway, I like what Lizzie said as a basis to build on and a resolution that the student members of our committee have brought to our attention. I don't want to say a gap, but a desire, a need to do more on climate literacy, starting in the elementary grades of the AUSD. And we urge the school district to hear them out and work with them in pursuit of that goal, which I think we all share.
I think I want to check in with Mira real quick because the conversation has changed a little bit. I want to know if there's room in the timing for us to figure out what this new, because since the CAC wouldn't be endorsing the attachment that was on the agenda, I don't actually know what would go to AUSD if a motion were to be made tonight. So I might have to do a little bit of procedural research to find out what this might look like, because I don't think we can just send a sentence. So I'm not sure how to recommend we move forward. So I'm wondering if there's time to come back to this in September.
Yeah, I mean, Member Fissoon, it seems like the committee's given feedback that there's two paths that would be supported. One is less prescriptive and just more of like a statement of, here's what ASU could do. Just a simple, quick sentence. The other one would be more development of curriculum. So it seems to me the subcommittee maybe should have some input here as far as, do you want to take this feedback and say, go for a statement from Climate Action Committee and be done? Or do you want to work with AUSD on curriculum and take it further? Those are the two paths that I'm hearing so far, right? So it feels like it's back to the subcommittee, a little bit.
And thank you, Eric. There's maybe a third path as well. I am aware of an organization that's called a Quaker Earth Care Witness Program, and they have a climate literacy program for youth. I'm not sure that it's the right grade levels. I think theirs is like 5 through 12 or something like that. But that's a bunch of PDFs that are on the internet. That's one that I'm aware of through a friend of mine. There may be other things like that. So maybe a third direction would be to look, and I think Dan said this in a different context earlier, but look at what else is out there, what's worked, and maybe, I guess, take that to the AUSD, because that's not our core expertise, but it's maybe a third path.
Sounds to me like there's not consensus for a motion this evening, but it's up to the committee to decide that.
Is there such a thing as a motion not to have a motion?
No, you just wouldn't do a motion.
Well, I don't sense that there's a motion. There's 6 of us, though. If anybody wants to make a motion, go for it.
I can check in with Committee Member Fassoon and Chair Mohammed tomorrow. If the committee doesn't recommend this, it's still, as AUSD students or members of the AUSD community, members of Albany community, anyone at any point could go to a AUSD board meeting and express thoughts on any of these topics. I just wanted to encourage the committee, if this is something you're interested, even if it stops at the committee at some point, you can still, as members of the community, advocate for this on your own, should you wish.
I guess I have a question for those 3 paths for Committee Member Fassoon. I'm wondering, do you feel it would be helpful? Although I guess maybe Lizzie's saying it wouldn't be really procedurally possible. Do you feel it would be helpful if we issued a sort of a vague proclamation of like, yeah, we support climate literacy? Or are you needing something a little more specific to this program?
No, I think big picture, like even, again, I don't know how that would work and if that's like a thing, but it's very similar to like when there's a bill and then organizations are like, yeah, we support, more trees or whatever like it is. And just having like CAC, which is like working on climate in the city, say like, oh yeah, we support, even if it's not a specific curriculum, but just in general, like overarching, we support, providing climate literacy to students or something along those lines is, helpful because it is coming from a specific committee that does work on this in the city. So yeah, something like that. I don't know, again, how that works and if that's like a thing, but that would be helpful.
If the timeline allows, I can look into it, but it would take until September to come back to the committee. It's not a super standard procedure, so we have to do a little figuring out what this might look like.
Well, I don't hear anyone making a motion, so I guess we're looking at your work with the subcommittee, and we'll bring this up again. It'll be one of the agenda items in September.
I think that sounds like the best path forward.
Okay. Do we vote on that, or just, no, okay. Well, the next agenda item is 5-4, if this is the time for that. So the first is the Environmental Justice Subcommittee, if there's a report on that.
No updates as of now.
I'm sorry, I didn't catch that.
No update.
No
Okay.
updates as of now.
Okay, thank you. There's quite an echo in here, so sometimes I have difficulty understanding what was said. Then the next one is the Zero Emission Transportation Subcommittee. Is there a report out from them?
I guess we, through vacations and conflicts, we've had a hard time getting together, so we haven't met. We do have, like I said, Ken McCroskey from the Transportation Commission is our liaison, so we're working with him to schedule a subcommittee meeting, and we should have something for the September meeting.
Including some progress on some of the topics we've talked about tonight. I guess we'll have to come back and, when we convene, think about what's doable in that 2-month span, but I think we can for sure tackle some of those.
And I'm happy to meet with you all in July or August to discuss if that would be helpful. Michelle will be enjoying a European vacation, but I'm here to talk EVs if you would like in the coming weeks. I'm not an expert, and I don't know nearly as much as Michelle, but I can help convey some of our rationale for what we included.
Is this a time for public comment, or do we go to?
Yes.
Oh, it is, okay.
Okay, if any members of the public would like to speak to this item, please raise your hand. We have a very quiet audience this evening. Everyone's on vacation, preparing for the recess. Back to the committee.
Well, the next item is presentations, and there's only one, and it's by me, actually. So I'll go ahead with that, if that's all right.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you have slides, or will you be?
No, it's just the text.
Okay.
Anyway. It's my belief that people who understand a bit of the technical detail are in a position to make better decisions. And so for that reason, I wrote a really simplified view of the electricity grid. I'll explain what's in here. Everything that's in here is correct, but then after that, I'll talk about the things that I left out, because this is the view from 40,000 feet. And before I start, anybody have a question or discussion? Okay. So we have an AC grid in the western U.S. Geographically, it includes British Columbia and Alberta down to northern Baja California, and it runs from the Pacific coast to Colorado, Montana, Wyoming, even a little bit of Texas, El Paso. That whole area, all of the AC lines there are connected, and they all operate at pretty much the same frequency because electrical impulses travel at about 60,000 miles per second. So if anything goes wrong in Texas, we feel it here real quickly, and vice versa. And the way it all works, it astounds me that it works this way, but all of the power plants that are on the western grid at any moment are operating in synchrony with one another, all pushing the electrons on the grid back and forth 60 times a second. And the grid operators, or they have other names, balancing authorities and whatnot, but they monitor the frequency in their area. They also monitor the power flows in and out of the area. I did not put that in here, but it's important. And they figure out if the generators in their area are doing too much or too little to keep the target frequency at 60 cycles per second. So the grid authorities order power plants to ramp up, ramp down, or they increase or curtail demand. Everything is based on keeping everything at 60 cycles all the time. The key message from that that's important for us is that there is no electricity storage on the system. I've encountered people who are quite knowledgeable, quite well educated, who say things like, well, the solar from my panels goes into the grid, and then I get my solar power back in the middle of the night. And that's just not the way it works. I mean, excess electricity can be converted into chemical energy, and that's true of power no matter where it comes from. But you can convert it into chemical energy in a battery, you can convert it into gravitational potential energy by pumping water uphill or moving rocks uphill, whatever, and then get it back. But the electricity grid is, it's balanced continually. It's every 6 seconds, actually, is what they do. And that's how the whole thing works. I put in here an example. Suppose that fog over the East Bay burned off kind of suddenly on a sunny day. All of a sudden, there's a lot more power from the solar panels in the East Bay going through the inverters and then hitting the grid and starting to push the frequency up above the target frequency. And then the grid operator here, the CAISO, the California Independent System Operator, or CAISO, sees that the frequency is increasing, and then they order other plants. They can't order rooftop solar to curtail because they don't have that ability, but they order other power plants to curtail in order to keep the frequency at 60. 10 years ago, before, there wasn't very much grid scale, there wasn't much solar on the system, period. So if all of a sudden there was a surge of solar in the East Bay, the CAISO would no doubt curtail a fossil fuel plant. That's still the case a lot of the time, but there are times, and unfortunately they're increasingly frequent, that the fossil power plants are already operating at the minimum operating level. You have to keep them on through the day so that they're there at 6, 7, 8 p.m. and they don't start and stop on a dime. So the CAISO sometimes has to curtail grid scale solar in order to accept rooftop solar. Not a real common occurrence, but I included in here a footnote to show how it's been happening and how it's been increasing over time. That's pretty much the point of this. I'll mention a few other things. If you want to look into this in more detail, the Western Electricity Coordinating Council is the name of the outfit that runs all of this. They have a really unusual website address. It's not .com, it's .biz, B-I-Z. So WECC.biz. From there, you can download their 2022 State of the Grid report, which has loads and loads of graphs and numbers, how many coal plants are running, how much power they're putting out per year, same for solar, wind, et cetera, et cetera. There's a huge amount of data out there. If you want to look at what happened earlier today, I put in a couple of links there. You can go to the CAISO website and you can see the supply up through about 10 minutes ago today. And what you would see if you look, because I did just before I came here, is across the middle of the day today, we were exporting about 3,000 megawatts of power to other states, probably to Arizona and New Mexico because it's so hot right there. But you can get a sense of exactly what's happening minute by minute, and the same source will give you what's happened on any previous day going back several years. I saw Preston Jordan at a city council meeting. He wanted to choose some random days, so he chose the 2 equinoxes and the 2 solstices to show a typical spring day, summer, et cetera, and just call those up just to show how much the hydro, for example, changes, how much the solar changes between the winter solstice and the summer solstice and so on. Anyway, I've talked, I think, plenty long. Any questions?
You mentioned that there is no storage, and that's, I mean, thank you, but is there any, and you mentioned some of the storage possibilities. Do you have any information on where things are going with storage, building out storage? When more power is needed, they would build a natural gas power plant in 20 years ago or whatever. Are there plans at this point to be building storage capacity in the grid? Let me just say in the grid.
I was not clear enough. The nature of the grid means that there is no storage of electricity on the grid. There's plenty of battery storage, and in fact, I personally was just astounded by how much it's increased, because right now, the battery storage in the CAISO, it's greater than the capacity of the Diablo Canyon nuclear plant. It's a big, big number. And it's used as fairly short-term storage. They put a lot of energy into chemical form through, say, noon or 1 o'clock on a summer day when the sun is high, but there's not that much demand yet for air conditioning and so on. And then they use that by converting the chemical energy back into electricity, particularly like 6, 7, 8 o'clock at night. And to me, it's been just astounding how quickly it's happened, because if you go back 3, 4 years, there's almost none. And now there's like 2,500, 3,000 megawatts, something like that. So it's been a huge development in my mind, and I assume it'll continue. So that's been a very positive development. But again, the point, the reason I wanted to put this here is that some people have this idea that my solar is being put in a box and saved for me for winter mornings to run my heat pump, and that's bogus. Okay, thank you.
Right. But if there's that storage capacity, why is there still this comment about there's too much solar? There's excess solar energy being produced. If there is the capacity to store it, why is there still that rhetoric?
The issue is sometimes all of the battery storage is being fully utilized. People are putting as much energy into it as it can take.
Okay.
But we have so much solar in this state, grid scale and rooftop. And boy, the WECC report would have the numbers, but it's, and maybe, Dan, do you happen to know the number?
I don't know the number, but I know, are you familiar with the duck curve problem? Yeah, so it's like we end up with a situation where we're curtailing because we have so much, like there's so much that, only so much we can export. And then we end up like in a situation where we have to curtail. We need more storage if we're not going to curtail. We have to do something with the energy. We either have to shut it off or store it or export it, when we have more than we're consuming in California.
So the grid still doesn't have enough storage to take care of the duck curve issue?
That's correct. My sense, and again, the WECC report would say this, but I think there's something like 15 to 20,000 megawatts of solar in California now, if you include the grid scale and the rooftop. And the storage, I don't think we've reached 4,000 megawatts yet. So there's and battery storage is huge, and the growth rate of it has been phenomenal, but still it's tiny compared to the amount of solar that we have. Any other questions, comments, public comment?
I'm curious. First, thank you. It's always good to learn more about where we're at with the power grid. I'm curious where this leads you, sort of at that. If this for you suggests any city scale initiative or action or thing to support.
I'm not aware of any direct linkage, but this sort of thing comes up when people talk about, for example, EV charging, because some of these EV chargers put a big load on the system. And let's see, there's a difference between power and energy. Let me just talk about that for a minute. Suppose you have a car at the foot of Marin Hill and you want to get it up to the top. The amount of energy that it takes to get from the foot of the hill to the top is the same no matter how long you take to get it up there. But if you want to get it up from the bottom to the top in 1 minute, that takes a lot more power than doing that over the course of 10 minutes or longer. And so you need more power, and that's an issue with EV chargers. These rapid chargers take a lot of power, a lot of megawatts. You turn on a bunch of those, it knocks the frequency down, the CAISO has to adjust to bring the frequency up. If you have a bunch of trickle chargers, then they take much longer. You get to the same place, your EVs are charged, but it takes a lot longer, it's less convenient and so on. But there's a trade-off there. And when you go to PG&E and you say, well, I have a 10 amp load around the clock, whatever, that's one thing. But if you tell them that you want to put in 1,000 amp, then they get real excited about that because it's a much, much bigger deal in terms of the conductors they need and so on. So there's some indirect relevance there, and that's part of the reason I brought this up. Thank you.
It is 8:51 and our meeting end time is 9 p.m. So I want to check in and see if the committee wants to extend the meeting. We do have a member of the public with their hand raised.
I mean, if we need to extend, I don't know how much more we have on the agenda. What is-
This is the last item, so it would just be public comment on this item, discussion of this item, future agenda item requests, public comment on future agenda items request, discussion. So perhaps we need more than 8 minutes. But up to the committee how much longer, given that those are the remaining elements.
Well, I'll move for an additional 10 minutes, even though I'm done with my presentation.
So to
second.
9:10? Okay.
I'll second. Second.
Okay. Pull up my roll call vote. Committee member Fasoon? Sorry, there's a lag.
Sorry. Yes.
Great, thank you. Committee member Hodges?
Yes.
Committee member Larson?
Yes.
Committee member Lieberman?
Yes.
Vice Chair Melgen?
Yes.
Committee member Vahil McClanahan?
Yes.
Great. If there are no other questions, we can go to public comment. We do have a hand raised. Okay. At this time, if anyone would like to speak to this agenda item, please raise your hand. Lucinda Young.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It was informative. It would seem to me that given that a significant portion of our grid is still fossil fuel based, that the solution here is not less solar, but is more battery. That would appear to be the solution that is in alignment with our climate action goals. And also, although this was informative, I do have to ask the question, I'm not clear on how this supports our city's achieving or moving in the direction of its climate action goals, which is my understanding the purpose of this committee. And I do think that given that the committee only meets once a month and skips next month, and given the urgency of the climate situation that we find ourselves in, that I think a lot of thought needs to be given to how the committee, what the committee is putting on the agenda, and to make it sure that it does further our climate action goals. But it was a very interesting presentation. I did learn some things. I'll save the rest for, we're going to have opportunity for some suggestions for future items. Thank you.
Okay, there are no other members of the public with their hand raised. Back to the committee for discussion.
I have one comment. I really appreciate the presentation. I think it's great info. I think the silver lining on a lot of this is that in California, we have a million mobile batteries driving around, right? We have electric cars, and they do consume load, like when they're charging, but they also can be used as an asset, hypothetically, to power your house, to provide, the storage that we need to capture that excess solar when we have excess solar generation. And there's a lot of work being done now on vehicle-to-home, vehicle-to-grid integration, so that hopefully in the near future, when you buy your EV, you can use it to capture the solar from your house, drive on it, or put it back on the grid when it's needed, arbitrage the market, keep your house powered in an outage. You have more battery storage capacity in a EV than you do in a Powerwall, for example. So I think there's a lot of great opportunity there. I don't know if there's a role for this committee in that. It's there are billions of dollars being invested in bringing those sorts of things to market, and you can do that with a Ford F-150 Lightning, already. And PG&E is doing a pilot program right now for a very small portion of customers who want to try vehicle-to-home integration. So I'm excited about it.
Any more comment from anybody? From the committee members, I should say? Hearing none, I guess we'll go to, future agenda items. There's one that I saw in some email traffic that should be high on the list for the September, and that's Dan has a presentation on the incentive finder tool, if you want to speak to that anymore.
Yes, I want to quickly clarify for the record, not email traffic between committee members, but between chair and vice chair. So, sorry, just wanted to make sure we clarified. But yes, we do have right now on the queue an incentive finder tool from EBCE presentation.
Anything else from committee members for presentation items for September? Or agenda items, excuse me?
Yeah, I ask, procedurally, is this the only opportunity, or is it also possible to submit a request for an agenda item to staff?
It's best to bring it up during the meeting so that committee members can agree on what will be put on the agenda. So we typically want proposal to be made, and then committee members can have consensus on what they want to put the agenda or not. In the past, we've had members of the committee just email requests to the chair, and then it becomes complicated because there's no way for us to vet those ideas to everyone on the committee and to the public. So this is the best time.
I had an item that I mentioned before about doing just a quick update on EBCE rates, and also I have all the data about, how many customers in Albany are on Renewable 100 versus Bright Choice versus opted out, how many customers are on CARE, how many customers have an EV, have NEM, all of those things I have in a slide deck that I would be happy to share when we have time on the agenda.
I would be interested to hear if, Lizzie, you mentioned that you were working with someone on the Stop Waste initiative around restaurants and plastic goods. You might already just be reporting back as there are things to report, but if not, certainly I would love to hear an update on any initiatives connecting with Stop Waste.
Yeah, I can, it's all under the umbrella of SB 1383 implementation, but if you're interested in sounds like you're specifically interested in the technical assistance we're providing to businesses to be in compliance. Does that sound correct?
am definitely interested in that. I'm actually interested in everything pertinent to 1383. So
Okay.
anything that there may be to report, I'd love to learn and hear.
It's huge. So I will try to think through what would be most relevant to the committee at this time, and see if maybe in September we could bring something.
Thank you.
Unless you're looking for an update on procuring post-consumer recycled toilet paper for city facilities. If that's also 1383, so it's big. But yeah, we can think through something.
Yes, and whew, specifically, I think I always love to hear, whenever possible, any sort of metrics around like, okay, we're gonna reduce waste this much, and it's projected that that will help that much. And I don't know how much we're doing that analysis at the city level, but if it happens to be part of your work anyway, that would be great things to hear.
Yeah, we only track waste diversion annually based on reports we get from Waste Management. But we can send you the most recent KPI presentation that Michelle did that did some analysis on 2022 waste trends. We don't track it monthly, I would say.
Thank you. That's great.
But I can give you an update. I could go on about this forever. I'll try not to. I could give you an update on how many businesses we have signed up for organic service and such.
Thank you. That would be great.
Great. I guess I have one quick announcement. I should have mentioned it earlier, but I forgot. Natasha Gallatin, our Civic Spark Fellow, it's actually her last 3 weeks with the city. So if you have the opportunity to send her a note, or if you see her around town, make sure she's done tremendous work for the city these past 11 months, but she is leaving the Civic Spark program because her term is up. So if you have a moment to thank her, it is a well-deserved thank you.
Can you say what she's doing next, or?
She TBD. Going to save the world and then to grad school.
But she's doing that first.
I don't want to speak to Natasha's plans, but maybe if you see her, you can ask her. Any other future agenda items? We should open it up to public comment. Should we move to public comment?
Oh, yes, move to public comment.
Oh, we had a hand raised and then it lowered. Do we have any members of the public who would like to make announcements, future agenda items requests? Okay. Lucinda Young?
Hi, thank you. I've got lots of future agenda items. I did have a question. I don't know if you can answer or not, but I still want to put it out there. I'm a little confused about how agenda items are decided. I know over the various months I attend meetings, often there are agenda items presented by the public, and oftentimes I think they're very good agenda items, but then they just sort of disappear. I don't ever see them come back up again. And I was just curious how the decision is made after hearing public comments about agenda items. As far as future agenda items, especially knowing that this additional, there's additional climate funding available through DD that has not been spent, which I feel is really critical that be used for climate action as the voters had wanted and had and was the basis for the City of Albany public passing Measure DD. I have a few suggestions. I know there have been the heat pump HVAC rebate program, and I haven't heard lately how successful that has been, if we've already been through the full second 65,000. If that's the case, I think that Some more DD funds should be allocated to that. I also think heat pump water heater rebates should be considered. I see the city of Alameda and several other cities are offering those. The hot water heaters are not, heat pump hot water heaters are not as expensive as the HVACs, but still they are a significant source of emissions from homes. Also, e-bike rebates, another thing to consider. Hiring additional staff or using funds for bringing on additional contractors, for grant writing, for especially with the Inflation Reduction Act, all those funds becoming available and accessible to our cities. And that's going to be happening. My understanding is like next year is going to be really, really big for funds coming down the pike through the Inflation Reduction Act. And I would hate to see our city lose out on those funds because we don't have enough staff or contractors to apply for those grants. Also, in previous months, there's been a discussion about a point of listing energy efficiency. And I know one of the previous council members, committee members had done a lot of work on that. I'm not sure what happened with that. There's also
Lucinda,
been
your
a-
time is up.
Thank you.
There are no other members of the public with their hand raised. I can clear up the question, though, about how are agenda items decided. Like we just discussed, if committee members request future agenda items and then there's committee consensus that that's something the committee wants to put on the agenda, we make note of it. And then in the month leading up to the meeting and then the week before the meeting, staff and the chair meet to discuss what do we have time and what have we prepped for to put on the agenda. So that's how the agenda is set. When it comes to members of the public requesting future agenda items, that's more of a comment for the committee to consider. If a member of the public says, I want the committee to consider this, the committee should request that be considered at a future committee meeting. But we don't take all public comments and make agenda items out of that because our committee doesn't get a ton of public comments, but some committees do, and it's hard to say how agenda items are set, and they're set by the committee. So I hope that clears that up.
So with that, do we adjourn?